Welcome back. I'm Matt Williams, one of your 53 Superior Court judges, and today we're going to be talking about juror management in the context of the Zoom and the virtual trials that have become, well, basically our new normal. You've probably already heard Judge Cahan at the start of this series talk about how this is the new normal, and we can expect that virtual jury trials and the processes surrounding virtual trials are going to be part of our lives going forward. You've probably heard in Section 1, Judge Phelps, where she walked you through the specific things that you're going to be doing pre-trial to get ready for and to prepare for that virtual trial and those necessary steps. You've heard Judge Keenan give you the tools that you need to be able to conduct an effective virtual jury selection and a virtual jury voir dire and walk you through some of the additional tools that you're going to have in this process that you wouldn't have had during in-person voir dire. And now we're going to talk about how you're going to be interacting with the jury, what you can expect your judge to be doing with the jury, and how we monitor the jury. Specifically, today what we're going to cover is and we're going to take a look at what it looks like when the jury is sworn in virtually. We're going to talk about what's going to be in the opening instructions, and it's a little bit different. The virtual jury room, and we know that you're concerned about that, and you want to know what is that going to look like, and how's it going to work, and how are you going to work around the virtual jury room, as well as jury monitoring during trial, how the jury will take notes, how the jury is going to ask questions during a virtual trial, as well as what do those final instructions look like, and what do you need to do to get ready for them, and jury deliberations. And finally, that magic moment at the very end of the trial when the verdict is taken, and how does that occur in a virtual environment? And we're going to walk through all of those things here. So first, let's take a look at, and let's actually listen to Judge Keenan swearing in a jury.
As jurors, you need to take another oath. So would you all please raise your right hand so that I can administer the oath? You solemnly swear or affirm that you will well and truly try this case and render a true verdict based upon the evidence in the law. If so, please give me a thumbs up. Thank you, everybody. So for the record, all of the jurors gave me a thumbs up indicating that they agree to the oath or affirmation. Members of the jury, now let's discuss your rules for participation in a Zoom jury trial.
Now, each judge may have their own different way of handling that. Many judges, in addition to the visual cue, will also actually have each juror call off or answer in unison. But the key thing is that the record is being made that the jury has been impaneled, that the jury has been sworn. And of course, as we're learning through this entire process,
you need to take another
there are many ways of skinning this cat.
Please raise.
The next thing that's going to happen is that your judge is going to give those opening instructions. Now that is going to include your standard opening instruction, the one that we're all used to in terms of WIPIC 1.01. But we've modified those instructions to include some logistical instructions that are unique to this format, as well as some instructions so that the jury understands how to use Zoom and how to best interact with the trial, how to best interact with you, and of course, how to best receive the information that you're trying to present. Now, some judges, not only will they read the instructions, but we've actually prepared PowerPoint templates, and some judges will actually even include a PowerPoint template that's part of their instructions. And those instructions, as I said, they'll include the standard instructions, but woven into those is guidance to the jury about their role and also some of the technical aspects and what it's important for them to do during the trial. So as an example, we remind them that this is still court. We remind them that they can't multitask. We remind them that they have to stay seated and that they have to stay focused. We provide them specific information and we tell them you got to keep your video, the juror's video, on so that the judge and the lawyers can see them and monitor them, that their microphones during the trial have to be muted, and of course that they need to keep us in the loop in the event that they have any kind of audio issue. Some judges may even teach Zoom basics, like how to hide the non-speakers, so all they're seeing is the witness that's testifying, possibly their fellow jurors, but usually just the witness that's testifying and the lawyer that's asking questions. Some judges will actually teach them how to adjust the screen share size of the screen so that they can kind of zoom in, zoom out on the exhibits that are being displayed. But now let's talk about what happens when the jury starts going into the jury room. Interesting fact, the jury is not required to be in the same place. And we find that in CR 21I. That specifically says that the jury may be allowed to separate, and in fact, that's kind of the presumption, that they don't have to be in the same place. They don't have to be sequestered where they're completely isolated. And that's how the virtual jury room works. They're in different locations, but for purposes of the trial, they are alone and they are focused only on the trial. We do that by creating a virtual space for them, a breakout room for them, in which we can both monitor them and we have the ability to bring them in and out of the jury, out of the virtual courtroom very rapidly. It's usually about 10 seconds. We give specific instructions, no discussion about the case with anyone, and we make it very clear that they're not to look up things. And what we're finding is that the jurors actually maintain very, very tight focus, and we're also finding that they kind of self-monitor. We're not having any issues with the jurors going out and doing any additional research. We're not having any issues with them having discussions among themselves about the case. In fact, we're finding that they kind of self-monitor themselves, and to the extent that there ever are issues, well, they kind of inform on each other. Now, during those opening instructions, you may see the judge and the jury actually practice going in and out of the virtual jury room. And they may also practice the use of the Ask for Help button, which is a button inside. When they're in that breakout room, they can ask the bailiff or they can ask the judge for help, and that just tells them that there's something going on there that is a problem. While they're in the virtual jury room, the bailiff and the judge who are monitoring that breakout room can see that they are actually there. There's a little green light next to their name, Juror 1, Juror 2, Juror 3, and if for any reason they get disconnected or there's a problem, that becomes instantly apparent, and it can be dealt with even before the jury is brought back in. Let's talk about the actual trial itself, because of course you're going to be concerned that the jury is paying attention and that their connection is valid. Your judge will monitor this. We spend most of our time actually scanning the jurors, zooming in, pinning on them, taking a look, making sure that they're paying attention, making sure. And one of the things we have to be aware of is, of course, the way in which they may take notes, and they're allowed to take notes, but they don't have to be in written pads. We give them a specific instruction that says that they can take their notes on their computer, but after the trial's over, they have to destroy those notes. But we monitor them. We monitor for their presence, and we monitor to make sure that they're paying attention. And one of the things that we ask you to do is, if you or your assistants who are watching the trial, we ask for you to help us with that. And in the event that there's any kind of issue, we ask that you just make sure that we say, hey, we can't see juror number 12. We can't see juror number 16. And most of the time, your judge is already going to be on top of that and will have stopped the proceedings. In civil cases, there's, of course, the right of the juror to ask questions during the trial. And of course, usually the way that happens is that there's a pad that's circulated and the jurors rip one off and they write their question. Well, here it works a little bit differently because, of course, everyone's remote. The questions in this format are transmitted to the judge or to the bailiff in one of three ways. One, either the jury is instructed to simply email their question to the bailiff or to the judge. Two, we actually use a subset. You remember Judge Keenan described the MS Forms questionnaires. There's a smaller version of that can be sent to the jurors that they can fill out, and it creates a spreadsheet of their questions. Some judges prefer not to have the jurors exit the Zoom application. They want the jurors just to stay right there. And those judges will use the chat function. And the chat function in Zoom allows it to limit the chat so that the jurors can only direct a chat directly to either the bailiff or to the judge. And then what happens is that those questions are compiled. They're put in a formal typed up document, which is what you see on your screen right now. And then the jury is asked to step back into the jury room, at which point the lawyers in the virtual courtroom, but outside the presence of the jury, who are off in the virtual jury room, the lawyers and the judge have a discussion about each question, and the decision is made whether to ask that question or whether to not ask that question. And so this practice, like I said, it can use one of three different formats. And in fact, during the opening instructions, you may actually see your judge actually have the jurors either send a chat or use the witness questionnaire or send an email, just to make sure that the jurors are in the loop and it's functioning correctly. Okay, we're at the end of the trial now. The jurors have been paying attention. They've been looking very carefully at your exhibits. And now it's time for the jury to receive their final instructions. Well, what do you need to do? Well, of course, you need to make sure that you have your final instructions on the law. These are the standard instructions of what you would normally submit. But the judge is going to add a few instructions. Those instructions will deal with the process. They will emphasize the confidentiality of the deliberation room. They will tell the jury that they can only deliberate when everyone's in the room, and if anybody loses the connection, everything has to stop. By the way, usually that has been demonstrated a couple of times during the course of the trial. And they're also going to instruct them that they can only look at the exhibits when they are all together doing deliberations. Yeah, I know you have a question about exhibits. We're going to get there in a second. Those final instructions will also explain communications. They'll explain to the jurors what to do if there's a connection issue. And again, during the course of the trial and the voir dire, there's always a connection issue. There's always a moment when someone drops off. We'll talk about that in section 4. And that usually is a great training moment for exactly what the jurors need to do if for some reason one of the jurors has an audio issue or a connection issue. And finally, what those instructions do is they explain the verdict form process. So now they enter the jury deliberation room. And of course, just like an in-person jury deliberation room, there's no one in there with them. They are self-monitoring. But the bailiff is monitoring that jury room from the virtual courtroom. Now, they're not listening to the deliberations. They're not watching the deliberations. But they can tell by the use of the drop-down menu that all the jurors are there because the little green light is on. They can see when someone drops off because the little green light goes off and it shows them being not joined. And they're available if there's any questions. And so the presiding juror or any juror has the ability to push the Ask for Help button, and that tells the bailiff that it's time for them to first send a message in, I'm coming in, stop your deliberating, just like knocking on the door, and then the bailiff will go in, and he or she will then find out what the issue is and what it is that they need. Again, entirely virtually. Now, at this point, you're thinking, okay, how do they get the instructions and how do they look at and get the exhibits? We're not going to be shipping out packets. Well, we could do that. We could send them PDFs and PDF binders. That's one way of skinning the cat. There's an easier one, and this is the one that will happen in most of your trials. First, of course, the instructions in the verdict form, that'll be transmitted to the jurors via email. And, of course, the presiding juror will have those, as will all of the other jurors. So they'll each have their own copy of the jury instructions and the verdict form. The exhibits, however, and you probably remember that Judge Phelps walked you through the process of uploading your exhibits into ShareFile. During the course of the trial, as each exhibit is admitted, a copy of it is put in a special jury folder that's associated with your case. And the only thing that's in there are the admitted exhibits. And so that the clerk sets it up as each of the admitted exhibits goes through. Before the deliberations begin, your judge will send you a link so that you can look through that. You can make sure that what's in there are only the admitted exhibits and that all of the admitted exhibits are there. Every juror receives a copy of that link. Every juror can access those exhibits. But they can't copy them. The system doesn't let them copy them, download them. They're given very specific instructions that, well, it would be a violation of a court order for them to snip them or in any way take a screenshot. And again, they kind of self-monitor. And the system, and they're given instructions, they can only view the exhibits while they're in deliberations. We can tell when they're looking at them and what they're looking at, or rather the clerk's office can, if an issue comes up that someone has misbehaved. By the way, it hasn't. And so that's the way in which the jurors are able to see all of the exhibits, and they're able to see, and we're able to make sure that each of them has a copy of the instructions. Okay, they've looked at they've read the instructions, they've deliberated, they've discussed the case, they've looked at your exhibits, and the moment has come that they've reached a verdict. Well, what happens here is that the presiding juror is given instructions to sign it. They just type their name in it. They email it to the bailiff along with, and they ask for help, and they notify the bailiff that a verdict has been reached. Everyone is assembled back into the virtual courtroom, including you, of course, and at which point then the judge will take the verdict and then poll each of the jurors to ensure that it is their verdict. We follow the model that Judge Zille in the federal court created, and that is that after that's taken place, the judge will look at the virtual foreperson, the presiding juror, and say, do I have your permission to wet sign my version of the jury form, which is essentially the emailed version that's been sent by the verdict, by the presiding juror. And underneath their signature, or their typed signature, the judge will sign their name and date it, and that's what will be entered into the record. So that's it, start to finish, in terms of how the judge and you will be interacting with the juror, the solutions that we've come up with to some of these problems, and we wish you the very best in your jury trials. The next section of this is going to be about lawyer considerations. We're going to talk about issues around witnesses. We're going to talk about exhibits. We're going to talk a lot about exhibit handling, and the exhibit dance is a little bit different. And we're going to talk, of course, about impeachment and use of depositions during that. Now, again, if you haven't had the opportunity to watch Judge Phelps' section on pretrial, we encourage you to do that, because that really, a lot of what we do really relies upon things happening before. And we also encourage you, before you begin your first virtual jury session, make sure your selection process, make sure that you watch Judge Keenan's excellent lecture and explanation of the process, where he gives you specific tools on how best to complete this process. Thank you again. We'll see you in section 4.